Walter Sorrells back with more tips for the knife maker. Today, a feather Damascus chef's knife. So this project's pretty self-explanatory. Feather Damascus is a Damascus pattern that looks like, yep, a feather. It's very simple to say and very complex to make. So instead of blabbing, let's jump right on into it. I'll begin by stacking up a pile of 15N20 and 1084 steel in layers, then into the fire for forge welding. Once the first billet's stuck together, I'll draw it out into a bar. Then I'll grind off the scale, chop it up, and re-weld it to create more layers. You'll see why you need a lot of layers as I explain how the whole thing works. So the first stack has 20 layers. Now I've chopped it and forge welded it again. That brings you to about 100 layers. Chop it up again. This time I'll add additional pieces of high carbon steel. Because these are bigger than the other layers at this point, they'll stand out, giving variety to the pattern. There are a lot of different ways that you can make feather Damascus. This is just kind of the approach I'm taking here. Once you've got that third billet stuck, you don't want to smash it down. The next thing is to drive a wedge down through this third billet. This is going to chop it in half, but it also distorts the pattern. So now you have two pieces with this sort of swoopy pattern. You turn that sideways and forge weld again, and this is forge weld number 4. In this case, you're going to rotate it 90 degrees so that the face of the pattern is what was the side of the pattern. So here's how that looks in practice. Billet number 1, weld, smash, smash. Over to the surface grinder, grind, 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 flatten, 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 chop, 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 stack again. Back into the fire, weld, smash, smash, smash. Chop, chop, chop. Add in the additional pieces of thicker steel, tack weld, forge weld. Draw, clean, chop, weld again. Now, instead of the smash, smash, smash thing, we'll just put this chopper die specifically fabricated for this particular job and smush it in half. We specifically don't want this to be a super clean cut. We want it to actually pull the layers in. Then back over to the grinder, grind the faces smooth so not a whiff of scale as always. Then tack weld, handle, forge weld, smash, 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 rotate, draw it out some more, and now we have our final billet. Because the welds are going every which way, there's a ton of room for welds to fail, split, pop, whatever. I pull it out to inspect it. I got a couple of very small, sketchy areas that have to be ground out, but nothing to be too concerned about. Then, once again, back in the fire, drawing it out way more cautiously than I would most types of Damascus. Finally, once I reach the end, I'll hammer a little bit of a point into it. Now, I could forge it totally to shape. You'll see other smiths doing that. But I don't want to risk splitting anything or distorting the pattern too much more. This isn't a pattern that I'm super familiar with, so I just want to be cautious. So once I've got the tip pinched in a little and the center line kind of moved up to where the tip is going to be, I'll do the rest by stock removal methods, meaning it's all grinding from here on out. Quick note here, you asked and I answered. I've had tons of knife makers ask me about how they could get started as a knife maker, so I've come up with a free PDF that gives my top 5 hints for how to get started in knife making. A lot of people just don't know how to take that first step. Hey, I've been there, but I'll get you the hookup. Just click the link in the description for my free PDF and it'll give you all the information you need. Jumpstart your knife making hobby or career with these super useful hints. Like I said, totally free. All right, let's get back to work. So it's back to the surface grinding attachment on my Ameribraid, and we'll grind this down to final thickness. This is a fun process which pretty much coats your entire body with abrasives and steel dust, but eventually it's nice and flat. If you hold it to the light, you can see enough of the pattern to see everything's looking as it should. No weld failures, and the pattern did what it was supposed to do. Now I'll chop off the excess and prepare for actually making it into a knife. First, a couple of holes for the handle. Then over to the grinder. Sometimes I have really exact patterns in mind that I transfer to the knife before profiling, and sometimes I just kind of draw the knife on the grinder. I'm taking that approach here. I've made enough similar knives over the years that I'm pretty confident about what I'm doing. So I'm aiming for a 9-inch blade and a handle that's roughly 5 inches. As I grind, I like to test the feel of it to see if it feels the way I want. Next, time to bevel the blades. I'll start by scribing center lines to use as a reference so that everything's symmetrical. Usually I do this with a purpose-built scribe, but here's another way. In this case, I'm using a height gauge on a granite surface plate. Then over to the grinder, starting with 36 grit ceramics to rough in the bevels. I want the final bevels to more or less reach the spine, so I'm leaving a tiny bit of grind line that I'll remove after heat treat. In my view, you always want chef's knives to have the tallest bevels possible. The thinner that angle and the taller the bevel, the better it's going to cut. Now, because you're trying to get so high up on the blade, it's extremely easy to overgrind a chef's knife and cut into the spine, so I just want to very cautiously creep up to the final lines. Now I'll quench it to harden the steel. Chef's knives, being extremely thin, are notorious for warping in the quench. Same goes for anything made from complex Damascus. There's just a lot of stress built into it. So I'm going to oil quench this blade, pull it out while it's still pretty toasty, and stick it under some aluminum plates where it'll cool for the last few hundred degrees and hopefully stay straight. The key point here is that you can't pull it out while it's too hot or it won't harden correctly, or too late and the plates won't do anything to cure warpage. Yeah, that was a little too early. That's better. And here we go, into the tempering oven to alleviate the brittleness that comes with hardening. While the blade's tempering, I'll get cranking on the handle. I'm using this spectacular piece of stabilized redwood burl. Slice it on the bandsaw, then over to the disc sander to flatten it. I did a little hand sanding off camera, leaving a couple nice dead flat handle scales. Now I'm going to be using Corby fasteners, which have a 1/4 inch head and a smaller shank, so I drilled a shank width on the inside, then flip them over and use a step drill to form the dual diameter hole. Back to the blade. Here at the grinder, I'm cleaning up the scale on the bevels. Scale forms whenever steel's heated, but now it's got to go. Next, Everyone's favorite aspect of knife making, hand sanding. Now I know guys who claim there's a zen-like pleasure to sanding. Oh wait, actually no, I don't know anybody who says that. Sanding sucks. It's the curse of custom knife making. If you think you want to be a custom knife maker, just recognize that you'll spend 5.7 years out of your remaining time on Earth doing this. First, I'm flattening the blade on a machinist's block to get rid of any subtle wiggles or wobbles. These bright areas are high spots that I'm working down. Probably only a thou or so high, but it still takes a while to get rid of them. Then it's on to the sanding block, moving through a sequence of grit to get a nice, even, clean surface. Now it's time to get the handles more or less squared away. Once the profiles are established perfectly, you'll be etching the blade, and once that's done, you can't adjust or change anything or you'll grind off the etch. Now some people just don't worry about this, and so you have the tang and the spine of the knife ending up bright and not showing the pattern, but I like to have the whole thing etched. So at this point, it's got to be right. I want the handle to be as close as I can get it to the final shape. Then I'll sand and buff the perimeter of the handle to its final surface. The top remains rough though. Now disassemble, degrease, and etch the blade in ferric chloride. Once I've polished up the etch, it's time to assemble the knife. The main point here is that I have to keep everything perfectly lined up and clean with all the epoxy squeeze out removed. We can't touch the perimeter of the handle without screwing up the etch, so just to reiterate, right now it's got to be dead perfect. So as I'm putting it all together, I get lazy. Try and force this Corby pin in with a hammer and split the crap out of my beautiful piece of wood. This wood is stabilized, but even stabilized burls are extremely fragile. Some have so much stress built into them that they'll just kind of pop for no reason, but that was not the case here. I was just being impatient and dumb. Mother. So, back to the drawing board. This time with a nice piece of Hawaiian koa that my buddy Dan Moynihan gave me. Not only do I have to redo the handle scales, going through every little step of that way, but because that ends up grinding the perimeter of the knife again, I have to re-etch it, re-polish it, the whole bit. So I lost a good solid day of work, but eventually we get there. The top of the handle scales have to be profiled and the Corby pins ground down. And then it's hand sanded and buffed, again being reasonably careful not to buff out any of the patina on the Damascus. And voila, ready for the kitchen. thanks for watching. Hope you learned something. I know I did. And keep on making those knives. Thanks for watching, guys. If you like what we're doing here, please subscribe and make sure that you click on that bell so you get notified of all the latest videos. Want to buy a knife from me? Check out my modern blades at tacticsarmory.com. Digging the channel? You can support our video making efforts on Patreon. You know, I've been banging away on these videos for like 10 years, so I hope you'll show some love for all that hard work. Link in the cards and descriptions. Finally, if you're interested in making Japanese swords, check out my full line of Japanese sword videos where I show how to forge Japanese swords as well as how to polish them and how to make fittings, handles, and scabbards. Walter Sorrells Blades.com.